Hey everybody, thank you for watching. Got a nice crowd. So last week we spent some time talking about the evidence in the case. We spent about an hour going over different pieces and things that we've at least heard about in the case. I was still getting comments, afterward that people were just saying they have no evidence. And it was just so interesting to me, after all of the things that we've heard about the case and, we can spend an hour talking about the connections. It's okay to dispute the evidence, but to just say they have no evidence is just kind of baffling to me. And, an hour after us talking about it, a year and a half of hearing about it, it's just surprising, So I just want to do a poll here at the beginning. Put a 1 in the chat if you think Bryan's guilty, and put 2 in the chat if you think he's just the unluckiest guy in the world, right? And he's innocent. Let's get a feel. It's okay. It's okay if you think he's innocent. That's fine. I like that. I like that you're, are not afraid to go against the grain and, kind of against the evidence. And there's a difference too between, is he innocent or is he innocent until proven guilty, right? You can look at it from 2 perspectives. I like B-Rad. Good to see you with a 3. But there's a difference, right, with innocent and innocent until proven guilty. I think, if you're in the camp of he's innocent until proven guilty, you have to at least acknowledge that there's some evidence against him, right? And so the challenge is overcoming that. But maybe you think he's just completely innocent. He, the evidence is just invalid, and at least kind of explain that a little bit and back it up with, your angle there. And I'm just curious. There's nothing wrong, with thinking that there's a conspiracy going on or something, or, he's being set up. I just, like I said in my last video, I happen to kind of be in that camp, and it's coming straight from the defense as well. Bryan's own attorneys. If you feel like there's just no evidence against Bryan, his own defense team has stated there's evidence. And if you listen to this clip here, you'll see what I mean.
Judge, I'm not going to give you the specific date right now in open court on one of the subpoenas, but they used a subpoena to get one of the most critical pieces of evidence in this case. And they know that.
Okay.
And they are going to use that.
It's something that I don't know about.
I mean, you probably you do know of it. It's in the probable cause affidavit.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Ms. Jennings,
What I can tell you is that for the majority of the stuff, we did state search warrants, and we've received many of these records that way.
So there is evidence. So you have to at least concede that, right? And say, yeah, there's evidence, but here's why it's not valid. And actually, if you are in the Bryan's innocent camp, you might like tonight's live, because I am going to concede something in this investigation that I think is questionable. And I'm interested to hear everybody's thoughts on that. And it's in regards to the search warrant at Bryan's apartment and how that was executed and kind of the findings from that. And not to say that it's exculpatory to Bryan or anything. I just think, there, and it goes both ways. It's questionable, in a couple angles, but I want to go through that a little bit tonight. Talk about some of that blood evidence that they found. There's about 60 pieces of blood or stains, blood evidence, or I'll say, sorry, stains that were tested. And just, 2 of those came back, two of the areas came back positive, and then 1 was collected according to what we've seen, and a lot of negative tests in Bryan's apartment. Now, that doesn't mean that's not necessarily evidence. If you pay close attention to the warrant and the way they noted things, a lot of those stains, had there was irregular stains and diluted stains, and so it's possible that Bryan cleaned his apartment up, which I would expect he would have, and he would know what to use in order to kill whatever, get rid of whatever evidence he could, in my opinion. But it is possible he missed a few things. It's not easy to get everything in regards to that. And I almost wonder if the hair that they found in the apartment might be more telling. And the one that's really intriguing to me also is the the possible animal hair under the mouse pad that's mentioned. So that one was interesting. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then I do want to talk about kind of how they executed the warrant. And I have some questions for everybody too about kind of why they did some of the things that they did. And so initially they went into the apartment. There's some footage of them going in through the door, and then they, there was a document released that kind of outlines what was done, during the search warrant. And they moved their way through the apartment, and they tested a lot of stains. There's 60 of them they tested. And there was just, there was just a few of them that came back as actually positive for blood, but there were a lot of things tested. And so I'm going to circle back to the beginning here with the glove and some of the other items, because I want to talk through that a little bit and get everybody's opinion on why you think they may have taken some of these items. Because when they execute a search warrant, obviously in this case you'll see as well, they're looking for specific things. They're not just going into his apartment and saying we're just going to grab everything and take it back to the lab. They're looking for things that are related to the case, right? And so when they go in, they're going to see things that they don't take. And some of these things that might seem irrelevant, they took for a reason. And it might be because it's just in the description of what they're told to take. It might be a digital device, right? So they're going to take those things. But things like the receipts, for example, it's curious as to why they specifically collected those versus you'll see at the end here of this document, they talk about how Bryan's defense team goes into the apartment and gathers some of his items, which included a receipt and other items in his apartment. Books, a laundry basket full of books. So why did they take these receipts, right? Why didn't they take the other receipt that was in the cabinet? So there's got to be a relevance there on those receipts. But a lot of interesting stuff here from the search warrant at Bryan's place. But back to the blood here. You can see here and I was actually going to make a video months ago about this, and the fact that they only tested one stain out of multiple stains and then took the item, it must have tested positive, right? So you can see here they tested a lot of items that came back as negative. I'm going to move my chat over here. And they have a pretty good description of where these stains were and, some of the various things that they tested. Some of these, I don't know if they look like blood or not. Now, usually the other thing about this, again, that's curious to me in regards to the execution of this is, from what I understand, they'll typically do a visual inspection and search for blood, and they'll often use luminol, which is pretty harmless to any trace evidence of blood. And they'll do that in order to kind of identify what they want to further test. So I don't know if they did that in this case or not, and that's what led them to some of these stains that they're identifying, because there's a lot of them that they discovered. So it's possible they went in and they used some sort of agent and identified some of these stains, and then when they tested them, they came back as negative, right? Yeah, the note, Harlot. Yeah, I'm curious about that too. I made a just looking at the chat here, Harlot says that she wonders what the note's all about. I'm wondering if you're the note to Dad from Bryan. Yeah, I mentioned that in a video a while back. I think there's also a note from Bryan from Montana, right? And I wonder if he had a training or something in Montana. But those were interesting. Why would they have taken those? Same kind of idea. There's a relevance there, you would assume. So the same thing applies here with the receipts and they took it for a reason and they left another receipt. So, I mean, did they just overlook that other receipt? I don't think so. I think there's something there. It might have been just dark clothing. But there's another piece of evidence I want to mention later, and a way it can be very relevant in the case depending on the outcome. And man, this warrant here is just full of stuff as well. And if I pause here, everybody, I might just be looking down at the chat. I want to keep up with the chat more and track the comments. It's just looking at both here. So if I pause, I'm probably just scanning the chat there. It's good to see everybody. So with the blood here, they've tested multiple items. Now, some of these are interesting because they're explained as irregular reddish-brown stain, and they're describing these items in a certain way based off of their forensic training, and they're going to have diluted stains, they're going to have irregular stains, drops, and they're going to describe, where and kind of a brief description. But I wonder, did they use luminol here and try to determine where some of these stains were, and they came back as negative, which if Bryan had done some cleaning in the place, he probably would have used something that he knew would have. So cleaning agents that, for example, have oxygen, there's things that can kill the oxygen in the blood, and it'll cause it to come back as negative. So possible, right? But some of the descriptions of these stains are interesting. It's almost as if there was one in here, I think it's noted as it's, I'm trying to find it here, but it was like a smear, or, kind of a description of a smear type of a thing. So maybe there's signs there of some cleanup that was being done in certain areas. I don't think, obviously, Bryan's apartment wasn't the crime scene, so it's not like there was, like at the house, which could be very telling as well. It's very interesting what they've discovered in the actual house. But Bryan's apartment wasn't the crime scene, and so there's going to be much less blood evidence in his apartment. That's expected, right? But if he did go in there and he had blood on him, it's possible it transferred onto other items, and it's possible he did kind of a scrub of his apartment anyway, just to be safe. So we don't know. They tested a lot. Now, there were a few items that came back as positive. So that's interesting. There's a very good chance those items are Bryan's blood. It's on a pillow. It says an uncased pillow, and it's on a mattress cover. Places where Bryan would have slept, and I'm sure if there's probably people probably have traces of blood on their sheets, but it just depends on kind of what they're seeing there. We don't know how big of a stain, what it looked like, anything like that. And then there's a description of another item that was collected that was not tested at the site. It looks like it was a small dark red spot that flaked off the surface when upon touch. So they collected that. It was most likely fragile. So they collected that and took that, straight away without testing it. And then they took. So if you look at this document here, and hopefully I've got it blown up enough there for you to read it, and I'll cut this out for a minute so I get back on the camera. But if you look at this document here, all the items here, and the Ajax was interesting to me. Ajax bottle of soap. Bottle of soap, I don't know if it has the cleaner in it, but I do know they sell products that do. So I'm trying to find the one in here that irregular stain on edge of plate, cabinet west of sink. I don't know, it's a plate. We don't know what irregular is necessarily describing, the shape, perhaps. So a lot of these stains were tested, but back to my initial question, what does everybody think? I'm curious. Put a 1 if you think Bryan, or not Bryan, but put a 1 if you think they used luminol in Bryan's apartment to identify these stains, or do you think they just walked through and looked around, and looked for little stains? What makes more sense to you? One thing I wanted to show you, let me get back to the screen here, is there's a protocol that they follow in regards to the way they collect evidence. And this is from the Idaho State Police Guide. I know it's Pullman who executed this one, but it's going to be very similar. But it says examination of items of evidence for the presence and identification of human blood is routinely performed in forensic biology using visual examination, presumptive screening, and then a confirmatory test for the identification of blood and the species, right? And this says various lighting conditions, including IR and magnification, may be used in general evidence examination to enhance the observation of blood, right? So initially, right, you would think they went in and used luminol, and they went around and and tested it. So many of them, though, may not have just been blood, but who knows? Yeah, it looks like most people think they would have followed kind of that visual process, right? And looked around and used tools, and they would have taken a lot of photographs as well. And that's what brings me back to the actual findings on the warrant. So when you talk about all of those items they tested, just because they came back negative doesn't mean there isn't a clue here regarding Bryan. And so in my last live that I did, we talked a lot about the evidence and how it acts as a whole together, right? Everything is in support of each other. So this would just be another kind of behavioral thing. Had Bryan gone through and scrubbed his apartment, right? Remember, he went to Albertsons the morning after the murder. We don't know what he bought. They haven't released that. They might know what he bought. I would think they could find out what he bought, and they would want to know. But they may have, discovered that. But maybe he went down and bought some cleaning items, went back to his apartment and did a cleanup, which would make sense. But it's possible he didn't get everything. It's possible he left a few items there that he missed, and they discovered them in their search. A lot of times we ask, in this case, it's so crazy. We ask, how did Bryan make the mistakes that he made? Why would he have done what he would have done? I don't think he was thinking rationally, like what we're trying to do. We're trying to rationalize his actions, and I think Bryan was spiraling. And that's something I am going to talk about in my next live. For those of you who like to kind of delve into the motive aspect of the case and talk about maybe the mindset of Bryan and what may have been going on in his life. Well, I want to talk a little bit about that in my next video, but I do think he was spiraling out of control, and kind of it was a breaking point. That's just my opinion in my theory, right, on the kind of the why and when you ask, the motive and things like that. So he most likely would have known enough to go and clean up and things. So more to come. So what does everybody think? So we have a few items that were tested. Let me jump back over to that. We have a few items that were tested that came back positive. So the first one was a dark red spot that they took a little piece, and it looks like it was on the kitchen counter right next to the sink. And then we had the B item. They labeled it B. It's the reddish brown stain on the uncased pillow from the south side of the bed. 2 separate stains. Only the larger stain was tested because it came back positive. So they collected it, obviously. And so they've listed here, they took a cutting, tested positive. And then the C item is the mattress cover on the bed in the northeast room. So it was a 2-bedroom apartment. One of the doors was locked, apparently, in the apartment. The apartment was very sparse. Just kind of heads up for every apartment, for those who maybe haven't heard yet. But the apartment was very sparse. It looked like it had been cleaned recently. The bedroom in question that they referenced later, somebody had gone in and vacuumed and things, and they found they took the dustbin from the vacuum, which makes sense. They're going to take that to their lab, and they'll dump that out and probably go through it in detail. They got some of the hair evidence from the broom. But here we have a mattress cover on the bed. And it says brown irregular drip. So that's a little bit unusual, right? That's not necessarily you're sleeping and you cut your leg and it started bleeding or something, you had a bug bite. It says irregular drip. But it could just be Bryan's blood. But if it's just his blood, I don't know if that proves a whole lot, right? It would have had to have been kind of like a transfer from the victims. What do you think about that, everybody? If first of all, do you think it's Bryan's blood, or do you think it's the victim, or do you think it's going to be the victim's blood? Is what I'm trying to get at. So the blood that they found in his apartment, put a 1 if you think it's Bryan's blood, and put a 2 if you think it's going to be the victim's. Or say it like Angel. Animal blood from Jen. I think that's a very interesting theory. There's a lot of interesting animal connections here in this case with, the dog at the house, of course, in regards to the hair. And then there's the buddy connection that many of us feel Bryan could be connected to. There's also that situation where that car was broken into right next door to the King Road house. Very possible that he was, edging toward a bigger crime. Malibu says not interested in animals. I think he avoided Murphy in the King Road house. I really do think Murphy played a part in him fleeing when he did, and potentially could have saved Dylan's life. And, depending on what Bryan had planned, but it sounded, in my opinion, I think things got out of control from what Bryan intended. And I think Murphy barking that is noted to be heard on audio could have caused him to abort. So many questions in this case. It's easy to go down the rabbit hole. It's funny, everybody. Sometimes I'll be working on making another video or preparing for another live, and I'll go down the rabbit hole and it's 2 a.m. and I haven't done anything. And I'm just like, you find the weirdest connections in this case. But it's a wild one. Yeah. Malibu mentions the blood evidence in the car, and that's another topic for sure. I think there's some evidence there. All right, so back to his apartment. Most likely, I think it's going to be Bryan's blood. Unless he somehow, transferred it. I think that would be a stretch, but you don't know. I do think the hair, though, is an interesting one. Depending on how Bryan was after the attack, what was on him, how much blood got on him, it's really hard sometimes with these to kind of determine and have a theory if you don't know all of the evidence. So knowing things like the autopsies, more about the crime scene it allows you to kind of piece together a more accurate story. So it's really hard, with limited information. And so it's hard to say how much evidence he would have had without knowing more about the crime scene. From what we've heard, though, it was pretty bad. And, there was some struggle. And so very possible some hair or something transferred over. And they did find some hairs in the shower drains and on the end of a broom. There were multiple hairs that they just noted as hair strands. There's about 12 or so, and then there was one that was noted as an animal hair, and it was located underneath his computer mouse pad. And Bryan doesn't own an animal, as far as we've heard or know. Bryan doesn't own an animal, so the animal hair is definitely curious. So let's jump back over really quick to that actual what they actually told us overall that they found in that warrant there. Let me see if I can find that. Don't have that there. Well, maybe it's at the bottom here. Thought this document would cover it all for us. Yeah, long hair gets everywhere. You're right. Angel says it does. I hear you. And so does animal hair. So does dog hair. Where do you think the hair came from? Put that, if you don't mind, let me get off of this screen here. I think it's better to just there we go. The dog hair. What does everybody think? Where do you think it came from? Just a brief chat. There's the buddy theory, right? Could it be buddies? The really interesting thing too about that whole buddy incident is it was October 21st, and that was the same day I believe Bryan got reprimanded at work and could have been upset. It's just another weird, when you look at it and you try to figure it out. There you had Buddy the dog, that was the night of October 21st, same day Bryan was kind of running into all these issues, in his life and his school and teaching and his job. And, everything was kind of going downhill. I sometimes do also wonder if Bryan relapsed as part of his. Again, these are just speculation, right? That's what we're all doing here. But I wonder, right? Because he was doing so well for so long, it seemed like, and then all of a sudden this happens, and so, could it have been, maybe he's been hiding more, right? Maybe he's been hiding more than we know, but that is very common, right? People who kind of get clean from like their history and then they relapse and then they just really go out of control. And I wonder sometimes just the way that the behaviors and things like that in those questions I talked about earlier about, why did he do some of the things that he did, and him not thinking rationally and what was going on in his life at the time, some sort of breakdown, right, happening. But yeah, so Saturn says could be Buddy. And, Buddy occurring about a month before the murders. That's not even a month, just 3 weeks before the murders. So a very short time period there. Very possible the dog hair could be Buddy's. Murphy, I think, was in the other room. But if Kaylee had some of Murphy's hair on her clothes or something, then that could have transferred over very easily too. Malibu says Buddy has nothing to do with BK. Very possible. Could have been an animal that got Buddy, and that's just a curious case, right? That's a good poll, everybody. Put 1 if you think Bryan is connected to Buddy, and put 2 if you don't. And while you do that, there's an interesting thing. I mentioned a rabbit hole earlier. I was researching the case, and I started researching, and somebody mentioned earlier in the chat about page 118 in one of the warrants that we'll talk about. But I was actually researching the case, and I was looking up books that students read, and specifically psychology students and even criminology students read. And there's a book that's, interestingly enough, called the Curious Case of the Dog in the Night. And it's about a dog that gets killed in the middle of the night, and a little boy or a young man investigates who killed the dog, and it leads him along this kind of path of personal discovery in his life. And so it's kind of a popular psychology book. But in my search of looking for the page 118, like many of us have probably done, I thought it was really interesting that I came across that book one night. And of course I was up till 2 a.m. researching that book, trying to see if there were any insights to that. So yeah, The Handmaid's Tale, that's another theory, everyone. Yep. KJ says he was also interested in The Handmaid's Tale. We saw those pictures of him, look like hopefully getting his book signed. Maybe, I heard though it could have been for his mom, the book signing, but still, yeah, he was front row, right? So the apartment, the other thing about the apartment is, even though he may have cleaned up, there could be evidence that he cleaned up. And that kind of what I was talking about earlier before I got sidetracked was his behavior in the case. And we talk about the evidence as a whole. This is another kind of connection to his behavior of what he was doing. So if he had gone in there and cleaned up his apartment and spent a lot of time doing that, and there was evidence of, maybe smears or some sort of pattern there, and maybe the luminol is picking it up, but it still tested negative for blood. Maybe they're taking photos of that, and it's going to just be a small piece, but it's still one more thing that goes to this whole story of the evidence, right? Another interesting, curious behavior from Bryan in this whole situation. And then that, jump ahead to his behaviors in the house from what we've heard about, where when they raided the home, to arrest him, we've heard that he was putting his trash in bags, trying to kill DNA. So he's probably done some research there, which brings us back to the digital evidence in the case. And could they uncover some sort of research, or did he just rely on his, other places, to learn that stuff? But just, again, back to the behaviors, right? You have him doing those strange things at his house in Pennsylvania. So if he's cleaning up in his apartment, there's potential blood cleanup. And then you go to Pennsylvania, he's kind of putting his trash in the neighbor's trash. He's wearing gloves, putting his trash in bags. He's got 2 pairs of gloves in his pockets when they arrested him. and a flashlight, a Defiant flashlight, which possible it's a UV flashlight that he may have been using to kind of, make sure he's, check for any trace evidence that he needs to clean. It might just be a normal flashlight, but interesting. He had kind of a little cleanup kit in his pocket when he was apprehended. 2 pairs of nitrile gloves, I guess. Jen says she's been through hell and back in this case. Just a regular person who was drawn in. Yeah, there's so many things that appeal to everybody in this case that are, whether it's the victims, the mystery behind how it happened, the motive. There's so many questions, how it unfolded. Then you have the whole legal battle going on that's just kind of adding another layer on top of it. So the receipts in the apartment, I thought that was an interesting one. So what do you guys think about that? What do you think those receipts, what was the relevance on those? Do you think it was maybe dark clothing? Who votes dark clothing? Just a one. One votes dark clothing. He likes dark clothing. We know that. All of this, they took a lot from the Pennsylvania house. They took a lot of the dark clothing. That's the other question too, is what did Bryan do with all of his stuff? His apartment was cleaned out, right? All cleaned out. And so where did it all go? We don't know how much he had, but according to what they noted, he was pretty, his apartment was pretty sparse, and it sounds like, there wasn't much there. So where did he take, where did he take everything? Or where did it go? Is it what he took to his parents' house? Because there were a lot of clothing items and computer related items taken from his parents' house, but I don't know if all of that would have fit in his little Hyundai. And his dad had traveled out there to spend some time with him, right? So, where did all of his stuff kind of go if his apartment was so empty? Yeah, maybe strip down, burn the clothes. But yeah, just if it's sparsely furnished, we don't know exactly what that means, but it's just another curious question. Yeah, there's so much pointing to him being the guy. Like I said at the very beginning here, if Bryan is innocent, like he's straight up innocent, didn't do it, he's the unluckiest guy ever, right? Look at everything that had to fall into place that lines up with it being him. And ultimately the DNA as well. But gosh, if he's innocent, man, your DNA, your car, your phone, your behaviors, who knows what else, digital that they found. It's, Twizzle's brave, Twizzlestick, she's brave, he or she, sorry. But BK is 100% innocent, Twizzlestick says. I hear that. I hear there's no evidence as well, often. He'd be very unlucky, very, very unlucky if he's innocent. Now, I do think innocent until proven guilty is fair, right? Challenge the evidence, So when I talked about at the beginning of the law enforcement and the way they handled the search warrant for the apartment, there's another. Let me grab this here. There's another. Where is it? Yeah, here we go. At the bottom here of this warrant, there's another interaction here that is very curious, and this actually goes towards the defense's side. So the defense has been very adamant about discovery, right, and following up on sharing information, right? They've been all over the prosecution about that. We've all seen that happening. And so look at this is pretty interesting. Let me find it here. That's the storage unit they searched. So right here on January 10th. It says at 11:20. This is the I think it's the chief, Don Daniels, from the Washington State Police Department. So she met with the defense attorney and 3 others from her team for Kohberger at his residence. They showed her a piece of paper signed by Kohberger granting permission to enter his apartment to remove the WSU office keys that had been sitting on the TV stand during the warrant service. So those of you who think kind of in the innocent camp, this is kind of right up your alley here. So this is something that is, I think, weird to me, because the keys, I guess the WSU office keys, if you're serving the search warrant, would you check the key? Did they check the keys? I don't know. Did they look for anything on the keys, blood or anything? They're just kind of sitting on the TV. So she met them, she unlocked the door and provided them entry into the apartment. They went in to the TV stand and got the 2 keys. And then while at the apartment, the officer explained to Ann Taylor that she had actually forgotten to include the 3 samples taken from the apartment and provided her a copy of the return of search. She took the return of search and took the copy of the amended warrant and items seized log from the couch. So that was the list they left on the couch initially. They took photographs of the apartment and removed a receipt from the cupboard in the bathroom. So again, why didn't they take that receipt? And then she says, I believe they may have taken some other paperwork items from the living room. I remained outside the door during this time. So a search warrant, like I mentioned at the beginning, is very specific, right? They're going in and they're looking for specific items related to the case. And so there were items here left behind that weren't taken. And for whatever reason, those other items were taken. So things like the keys, things like documents, books, that they took in other situations. They took books from his PA house. So just a whole, mix of questions here with the way this warrant was executed. Well, then the other part here with Ann Taylor meeting the officer is they actually returned a second time and took more items out of the apartment, and including an unknown box of items. She didn't even know what was in it, right? I don't think she was the one who went in and processed the forensic evidence in the house. So she may not have been aware of everything that was checked, but she was unaware of what the defense team took out of the apartment. And then she had asked Ann Taylor to email her a copy of the document regarding going into the apartment, which Ann Taylor said she would. And then the officer notes that she still hadn't received that email from Ann Taylor with the document, that led her, to go get those things in the apartment. So Ann Taylor's doing just as guilty at that time anyway, right, of not following up with what she was working on. She probably handed it over at some point, but it's the same thing going on with the prosecution and the defense in regards to discovery. There's a back and forth going on there, but it goes both ways, right? The white shirt from his parents' house, Jen says, was that the one he was wearing, potentially? So there's another thing I wanted to talk about for those of you late night owls. If you want to hang out with me more. So here is, let me jump over here. The footprint. So when I was looking at the warrant here and I noticed the receipts and kind of in thinking what they bought, regarding his clothing that he was wearing, I thought about the shoes also, because they do have that footprint that they located at the crime scene. And, there might be more to come from that as far as the size of the shoe. I think Bryan wore a size 13 based off of the Pennsylvania warrant when he was arrested. I think he was wearing a size 13. I don't know if they measure his foot or they just measure the shoe he was wearing, but, wondering, okay, is it a size 13 at the King Road house? But the footprint is curious to me in regards to the receipts, because one thing that they can tell from a footprint is the tread pattern. So it's not necessarily the size, right? Yeah, but the tread pattern could be very telling. And so let's say, for example, they discovered a receipt from Marshall's for a pair of shoes that matched, and then the tread pattern on the footprint was unworn and fairly new or brand new, right? That could support it being the shoes that Bryan was wearing. Not to mention the receipt would be pretty telling as well. But things like that can be insightful in regards to the footprint. So the tread pattern, depending on how good of a print it was, and what it was good enough to see the tread pattern. And so looking at that, if it's like a brand new pair of shoes, and then all of a sudden there's a receipt in Bryan's apartment for a pair of shoes, or an Amazon purchase, and things like that we've been talking about with also other pieces of evidence. But the footprint, I don't know if that's going to come back around. I am getting a sense, though, that it feels like the things that they relied on for the PCA, they're trying to focus more on past that and more on the DNA evidence in regards to getting the conviction. And I'm wondering if there's some other connections they've found, and things from the PCA that occurred, like the footage, the cell phone pings. I think those were the things that more led them to the arrest warrant and the warrant to get Bryan's DNA that led them, to be able to arrest him. So that's, I think, where the prosecution wants to focus, right? They're past, you've heard the prosecution state things like they're not going to use some of these things that the defense is asking for, or they're irrelevant because they're not going to introduce them. And so I think, things like the cell phone pings, those aren't the things that proves Bryan's guilt. Those are the things that proved probable cause to get the warrants that ultimately proved Bryan's DNA matched the evidence at the crime scene. And then there is more going on. The FBI is still processing evidence. So, I think we're all going to be surprised when the trial starts, some of the things that they reveal that maybe we didn't think of or we were wrong about. But I think they're still processing evidence. I think they spent some time researching and digging through a lot of digital evidence, and then there's the forensic side as well, like we've been talking about. But something like a footprint, matching the size or matching a recently purchased pair of shoes, it's just another connection like what we've been talking about. And now there's a new blood spatter expert. So we've heard about that. That was revealed in the trial, the hearings recently, right after Cy Ray was questioned. There was some time spent with the prosecution and defense, and they did mention that they'd recently hired a new blood spatter expert in regards to processing some of the data. So that's going to be very interesting. They can tell a lot. They can most likely identify who was attacked first, the order, at least in the two separate locations, maybe even throughout the house, depending on if they were to find one victim's DNA from upstairs down in the lower portion or vice versa. So they should be able to tell the order of the attacks if they go that deep to confirm it. They should be able to tell where people were standing during the attacks. So this blood spatter expert is going to be very, I think, important in the case. So a lot more to come. I don't know. We'll see. I feel like the trial is still down the road. I wonder, maybe this fall, maybe this winter, late winter, maybe. But I don't know though. It might even carry into the next year with all of these hearings about moving the location. So Melissa asks, why do you think so much is sealed in this case? I've never seen so much lockdown. It's a very high profile case. There's a lot of eyes on the case as far as investigating, right? A lot of people digging into the case, and a lot of strong opinions, I think, in the case. And so I think what they're doing is they're keeping things under seal to protect the trial, the innocent, the innocent until proven guilty, and protecting some of Bryan's information. And then I also think they're protecting the victim's information, and that's really key because they don't want to reveal that stuff. And then you have the DNA evidence, which is also sensitive because you have people involved that are not connected to the case. And so, if those names were to get out, for example, they could be harassed, things like that. There's multiple layers there as to why I think they're keeping it under seal. Attention, sensitive information, protecting a fair trial, all of the above. Yeah, tainting the jury pool, exactly. Just, fair trial. Yeah, Jen, you can email me. It's for TrueCrime@gmail. So yeah, the footprint could be interesting. We'll see. We'll see if it comes up again, or if it was just enough to support the eyewitness description from Dylan. Yeah, I know. I mentioned Dylan. That's going to open up a whole nother conversation in the chat, right? But I'm really curious about the way they executed the search warrant in Bryan's apartment. Why did they leave some items? Why did they leave some receipts and take some receipts and leave some items? It's strange. There had to be relevance on those receipts. And, was it dark clothing? There's a Walmart receipt as well. The Dickies tag that they mention, which supports dark clothing. So my next video, like I said, everybody, I do want to talk. I don't want to get into it too much tonight because it's too much to unwrap in the remaining time that I have. So my next video will be about a little bit more about the mindset of Bryan. So like I said, if you enjoy that, be sure to, I'll post that up early so you guys can see that and enjoy. And I'm looking forward to talking to everybody about that one. But also on Friday evening at 6:30, I'm going to join the Drunk Turkey show and chat with them a little bit about the case. So keep an eye out for that if you're not familiar with that. I'll post that down in the replay here on this video if anybody's interested in checking that out. First time I'm joining another live on another channel, so it should be fun. And we'll talk a little bit about the case with them and have a good time on a Friday night. That'll be, I think it's going to be at about 6:30 Mountain Time on Friday evening. Yeah, so Crafty Girl says, I just wonder how true that he taking a shower before he left. Oh, you know what? As far as in the house, but he probably went home and started cleaning up right after. I have to be careful here, though, because that gets into the mindset a little bit of his actions and why he did some of the things he did. I want to save that a little bit, but. Great, Angel. Yeah, and thanks for, so Angel helped kind of put that together with the Drunk Turkey show. She let me know, kind of was like the middleman there and connected us. And so I'm looking forward to that. It'll be fun. Yeah, the tire tracks, those tire tracks were interesting in that picture. And from the description of how they say he stopped abruptly in front of the house, it almost looks like it was maybe when he was stopping, when he kind of made that sudden stop and hesitated there in front of the house based off of the description from the video on King Road. Speaking of the video on King Road, that was one of the items that the defense was asking for. We didn't know that. They revealed that in this last hearing. They had been asking, and they were going back and forth, and the prosecution and defense were talking about the items that had been resolved. And one of the items was the video from King Road. So the defense does have that now. So the Pennsylvania warrant's another one to unwrap. I do want to look at that a little bit more. There was a lot of digital devices taken from the Pennsylvania house, which was strange because Bryan didn't live at home. And so they were either old stuff that he left there or things that he took with him from his apartment. So the other thing they found in his apartment was one nitrile glove. They took one glove. They found one glove in the closet. Just one laying there. Maybe he just wore them when he was cleaning the apartment before he left. But just one. They grabbed that. And why did they collect it? Were they looking for any gloves? Did they test it for blood? right? Those who think Bryan's innocent, that's a good. Did they do a presumptive test for blood on it? Was there anything on it? Why would they take it? If they kind of did the inspection for blood, maybe they're more focused on DNA. Not so much blood, but take it in and process for DNA. Yeah, so he cleaned up his apartment. I'm curious where his stuff went. I'm curious about his dad's trip to Washington as well. I hate bringing, like the family in, but he is connected. He traveled out there and drove back with Bryan, right? They took an unusual route. I get it, the weather. They might have been trying to avoid the weather, but that's definitely, it's definitely a question that's fair to ask, right? Of Bryan's dad going there. I don't know if we know exactly when he arrived and how long he was there. And did he help Bryan move his stuff out of his apartment? Could that be what the subpoena was about in Pennsylvania for Bryan's parents? Could it have been about their interaction with Bryan afterward? Especially Bryan's dad traveling out there and possibly being in the apartment and helping Bryan clean up. If let's say Bryan's just moving out and his dad has nothing to do, obviously is not even aware of it. I'm not saying his dad has anything to do with it. I'm saying what did his dad see is what I'm getting at. What could he have witnessed that could be helpful in the investigation? So for example, if he'd gone to Bryan's and Bryan's moving his stuff and he's getting rid of it or it's going somewhere, he could be a witness of where that stuff went. Or what was going on, what was Bryan doing and things like that during those days after the murders before they figured out, that he was back in Pennsylvania. And then I thought it was interesting that they were both hand in hand in sync on those 2 times they got pulled over regarding the Bryan Kohberger situation. Both times, right, they kind of gave the officers the same story. That's interesting. Brings me back to Bryan being very aware of crime happening in the area, so I do think he was aware of the Idaho murders. And I think he was aware they were looking for a Whitey Elantra. But he didn't say anything, kept his mouth shut. But no, it's just another thing, right? Another unusual thing. But yeah, a lot of evidence. This was kind of a continuation there. Gosh, we could probably do a whole nother video about evidence and dig into more of the Pennsylvania warrant. And there's just so many unknowns out there, though. And really, really hope we can get to a trial. And I hope it does go to trial. I'm worried that it might not. I'm worried that right now this kind of secretly what's going on here is they're trying to save Bryan's life. I think with the death penalty on the table, and I don't think the prosecution is wanting to play the plead game based off of the evidence they know they have. And I think that the defense's long game could be to get rid of to hope to get the death penalty taken off of the table. And I think if they could do that, there's a good chance Bryan would take that and plead guilty, depending on what they have. I'm speculating on what they have. I know they have DNA. We know they have DNA. I think just the DNA enough is going to be really hard to overcome. But anything else on top of that to support that is really bad for Bryan. So if they could get the death penalty taken off of the table, I think it's possible a guilty plea could happen, depending on what they have that we haven't seen. I really do want more insight. I do hope, either way, whether it goes to trial or not, I hope we learn what they have and, everything, as much as possible to answer some of our questions. Yeah, so KJ doesn't think Bryan will cave. Yeah, it could be his personality. He may not. He may want to see it all the way through, but just some of the comments. I think the thing that leads me there is some of the comments the defense team has mentioned, especially in the last hearing. They were referring to trying to file some motions to suppress and and put into place kind of some, if the prosecution didn't follow through with some of the things, kind of put into place things that take the death penalty off of the table. Kind of an interesting angle, right? And then they're talking about critical pieces of evidence that they have against Bryan, which, again, back to the innocence thing, they're really attacking the loopholes. They're really attacking the technicalities of the evidence and how they got the evidence, much more than any sort of stance of, no, he was somewhere else. The alibi is most likely just another way to leverage to get an expert into the case, i.e. Cy Ray, right? So they kind of leverage that whole alibi thing with Bryan's location, with the data, to kind of, what they're trying to do is get an expert like Cy Ray to come in and try to put some doubt into the data. But even Cy Ray admitted that if he were to see all of the data there, his opinion could change, right? So I think Cy Ray is very qualified. He knows his stuff. I just don't think he knows the full story on what's behind the evidence in this case. And he's kind of looking at it from the outside, and he's giving an honest opinion of, yeah, the data's not all there that I've seen, therefore it could be important, right? However, if I were to see that, I reserve the right to change my opinion, is pretty much what he said. But yeah, very qualified guy. He knows the cell data. He just doesn't know the evidence in the case. And I think they want to try to, that's their witness. That's their expert witness here that's going to kind of go against the prosecution's cell data. So of course they want to kind of get him on the record there and start kind of planting that seed, right, for the trial. Yeah, Tess says forensic footprints don't lie. They're a lot more accurate than they used to be. I think in the Daybill case, they narrowed him down to like 4 meters, right? 10 or 12 feet based off of his cell phone location. So we'll see, what they have on that. But again, I don't know how much the prosecution's going to push that in the trial. I think they, that was to secure the warrants. I really think it's going to be DNA based and possibly some sort of connection to maybe a purchase of a knife or some other piece of evidence there forensically, not necessarily the cell phone data. The cell phone data is going to support him being there, right, as part of the whole story for sure. But I think as far as just in the actual trial, the things that the prosecution wants to focus on are that, and then the defense wants to challenge, how they got to the point of the DNA and those things, right, and kind of challenge the PCA and the cell phone data with their experts and try to get that stuff, again, a motion to suppress potentially, saying, oh, you can't use this. So they're attacking they're doing their job. They're doing a good job of defending Bryan, which is good and bad for Bryan. If they do a very good job of defending him and he's found guilty, well, they can't say that he didn't have adequate defense. So they're doing a good job of defending him, and they're exhausting every angle they can. And they're doing a good job of building a case for an appeal later on. So if Bryan's found guilty, they're with all of these motions and kind of this storyline that the defense, I think, is laying out there, it's going to be possibly something they can go back to later on and point out some things during appeal and try to attempt to get that. But they're not really defending his innocence. They're not saying where he was. They're not pushing for them to continue investigating, for other suspects. They were actually complaining. The defense was complaining in this last hearing because the prosecution was continuing to investigate the victims digitally. I think they're looking into some of their online stuff, but they're like, why is the prosecution continuing to look into the victims, right? It's like, wouldn't you want that? Wouldn't you want them to make sure and double check and continue to investigate when your guy's already sitting in jail? If he's innocent, you'd want them to continue looking, right? We have a great community here, 136 viewers right now. Thank you so much for supporting me. I really, really appreciate it. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Please subscribe if that's your thing. I appreciate subscriptions. I get it if you don't. It does help me out with the channel growth, and but But hit the like button for me if you can. That at least kind of helps get the video in the algorithm and helps other people kind of get exposed to it. Maybe they'll like it. So I'm going to do a couple minutes here of Q&A at the end, and then I'm going to wrap it up for tonight. But don't worry, I'm going to be on Friday night on Drunk Turkey Show, and then I'll be live again next week for you. We'll talk a little bit about what I was mentioning earlier and Bryan's mindset, see if we can discuss his motive a little bit. Not that we're going to figure it out. That's stuff that we may never know, but just some speculation there and maybe some interesting discussion amongst us. I'm not going anywhere, Angel. Yeah, KJ, have him reach out to me. I'm always up to collab. Yeah, Marietta, don't worry. No, I'm looking forward to it, and it'll be fun to discuss the case, and I'm definitely open-minded, and I appreciate everybody's perspective. That's what I want to do. I want to discuss the case. Whatever, if you think he's innocent, if you have a theory about what happened, if it, talk about it. That's what's interesting, right? But we don't all have to agree. It's okay. That's another thing I think that's so intriguing about this case. Remember right off the bat, I mentioned in my last live too, we almost, not saying anybody did, but many kind of forgot how intense it was when that case first happened. I'm sure many of us were following it, and I remember, the weeks leading up to Bryan's arrest, I was actually, before we knew anything on who a suspect was, I think most of us were looking into all of the boyfriends and all of the people that were in that circle. And then when they identified Bryan and arrested him, many of us were like, then it kind of shifted, right? But we were all looking at all these different suspects based off of all of our past experience of like, well, yeah, usually it's the boyfriend or, somebody they know, right? And so it all changed. And then it just got interesting from there. But we were already intrigued, before Bryan was identified as a suspect in this case. And it's just, it's really been kind of polarizing. But initially everybody thought he was guilty. It was like, all right, they got him, the kids were all scared, around the college. It was very traumatic. Right. And they caught Bryan, and everybody was kind of like, and everybody was kind of like, oh man, they've got his DNA and, all of these things. And then it slowly started to kind of, shift. And then you had more and more kind of saying, no, I think he's innocent, or, innocent until proven guilty, which again, that's fair. But it's really interesting how this case has played out and has kind of, drawn everybody in.